I'm Lillian Carter, 32, and until 3 weeks ago, I had it all. A thriving fashion design career in New York City, a gorgeous Manhattan apartment, and a devoted fiancé named Robert, who'd proposed beneath the stars on a rooftop overlooking Central Park. We'd spent 3 years building our perfect life together, planning our dream wedding. Then I went to Milan for a once-in-a-lifetime design competition. I came back early to surprise him, but I was the one who got the surprise of my life. My sister Abigail had stolen everything. But karma has a way of serving justice when you least expect it. Where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments, hit that like and subscribe button, and prepare yourself for the most unbelievable family betrayal you'll ever hear. Growing up in a middle-class neighborhood in Connecticut, I was always the creative child. From the moment I could hold crayons, I was designing outfits for my dolls, sketching dresses in my notebooks during class, and eventually sewing my own clothes. My parents were supportive but practical. They encouraged my passion while reminding me how competitive the fashion industry was. "You need a backup plan, Lillian," my father would say over dinner. Something stable. But I was determined. I worked through high school saving every penny, took extra sewing jobs, and eventually earned a partial scholarship to Parsons School of Design in New York. I spent 4 years working twice as hard as everyone else, taking side jobs, altering clothing, and designing custom pieces for anyone who would pay me just to afford living in the city. After graduation, I started at the bottom like everyone else. I spent 3 years as an assistant, fetching coffee and organizing fabric swatches for demanding designers. I lived in a tiny apartment with 3 roommates surviving on ramen and determination. But slowly, I started making connections, showing my portfolio whenever possible, and designing pieces in every spare moment. By the time I turned 28, I'd finally launched my own small collection. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Lillian Carter Designs specialized in modern wearable pieces with unexpected details. My first show was in a converted warehouse in Brooklyn, with borrowed chairs and friends as models, but a junior editor from Vogue happened to attend and mentioned my fresh perspective in an online article. That single mention opened doors I'd been knocking on for years. I met Robert Wellington at a charity gala, where one of my dresses was being auctioned. He was tall, confident, with kind eyes, and the kind of smile that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. At 35, he was already a successful real estate developer, transforming old buildings into luxury spaces across the city. "That's your design?" he asked, gesturing to the dress on display. "The craftsmanship is exceptional." We spent the entire evening talking. Unlike other men I dated, Robert asked questions about my work and actually listened to the answers. He understood the passion that drove me because he had that same fire for his projects. We exchanged numbers, and by the end of our first proper date the following week, I knew this was different. Our relationship blossomed effortlessly. Robert supported my ambitions, celebrating each small victory in my career as if it were his own. He'd bring me coffee during late nights when I was finishing designs, give honest feedback when I asked for it, and never once suggested I should scale back my career for our relationship. In turn, I admired his vision, his ability to see potential in abandoned spaces, and his genuine desire to preserve architectural history while creating something new. After 3 years together on a clear night with the Manhattan skyline glittering around us, Robert took me to the rooftop garden of his latest building project. "This is where I first knew I loved you," he said, leading me to a candlelit table. "Remember when I brought you here before construction started? You immediately saw what this could become, just like you see the potential in everything and everyone." He got down on one knee, opened a small velvet box, and presented a vintage emerald ring that took my breath away. "Lillian Carter, you've designed my perfect life. Will you marry me?" I said yes through happy tears, and the next months were a whirlwind of joy. We found a beautiful historic venue in the Hudson Valley for our September wedding. I designed my own dress, of course, a sleek silhouette with intricate hand-beaded details that took months to create. Robert handled most of the logistics while I focused on the aesthetic elements. We were a perfect team. My family seemed genuinely happy for me, even my younger sister Abigail. Growing up, Abigail and I had a complicated relationship. She was the practical one, the one who followed our parents' advice and got a business degree. While I struggled in New York, she secured a comfortable corporate job in Boston. She dated practical men with practical jobs and practical ambitions. When I introduced her to Robert, I noticed something shift in her eyes, a flash of something I couldn't quite identify at the time. She asked a lot of questions about his business, his family background, his investments. I thought she was just being protective, making sure my artist heart wasn't being taken advantage of. "He seems perfect," she said in a tone that should have warned me. "You're so lucky, Lil." 6 weeks before our wedding, I received an email that changed everything. The prestigious Milano Rising Star competition had selected me as a finalist. 20 designers from around the world would spend 2 weeks in Milan, creating collections that would be judged by the biggest names in fashion. The winner would receive funding for their next collection and mentorship from legendary designers. It was the opportunity of a lifetime, but the timing couldn't have been worse. It overlapped with our final wedding preparations. "You have to go," Robert insisted when I showed him the invitation. "This is what you've been working toward." "But the wedding," I protested. "There's still so much to do." "I can handle things here," he said, kissing my forehead. "Your family will help. Abigail's between jobs right now. She already offered to come stay in the city and assist with the final details. This is your moment, Lillian. Take it." His generosity made me love him even more. After much discussion, I accepted the invitation, promising to return with plenty of time before our wedding. As I packed my supplies and designs, I had no idea that I was leaving behind everything I held dear, or that the people I trusted most in the world were already plotting to take it all away. Milan welcomed me with warm September sunshine and the electric energy that comes with being surrounded by creative minds. The competition was housed in a converted 16th century palazzo, with studios for each designer and common areas where we could connect and share ideas. I threw myself into the work, immediately channeling my excitement about both the competition and my upcoming wedding into my designs. The first few days passed in a creative blur. I called Robert each evening, sharing the day's challenges and triumphs. He sounded supportive, but distracted often, cutting our calls short, with vague explanations about meetings or poor reception. "How are the wedding preparations going?" I asked on our fourth night apart. "Great, great," he replied quickly. "Abigail's been a huge help, actually. She's got quite an eye for detail." "That's surprising." I laughed. "Abby's never shown much interest in aesthetics before." "People can surprise you," he said, his voice sounding strangely tight. "She's really stepping up, spending a lot of time helping with everything." Something in his tone made my stomach twist slightly, but I pushed the feeling aside. I was thousands of miles away working on the biggest opportunity of my career. Of course, I'd feel disconnected from the wedding preparations. A week into the competition, I was FaceTiming with my mother when I noticed something odd in the background. "Mom, are you at my apartment?" I asked, spotting my living room wall behind her. She looked startled. "Oh, yes, dear. Abigail thought it would be easier to coordinate things from there since that's where you keep all the wedding files. She's staying there while you're gone." Robert said it was fine. I hadn't known about this arrangement, but it made practical sense. Still, I felt a twinge of discomfort at the thought of my sister living in my space without my knowledge. "Is Abby there now? Can I say hi?" "She's out with Robert, actually," my mother replied, checking her watch. "Something about meeting with the caterer, I think." Later that night, I received a strange message from my cousin Taylor. "Saw Robert and Abby at Maria last night. Didn't know they were so close now. Everything okay?" Maria was one of the most expensive restaurants in the city, known for being nearly impossible to get reservations. It was also romantic, one of the places Robert and I had gone for special occasions. A catering meeting seemed unlikely. I called my best friend Jessica, hoping for some clarity. "Jess, have you seen Robert and Abigail together lately? Something feels off." There was a pause too long to be innocent. "I've been really busy with work," she said finally. "But I'm sure everything's fine. How's the competition going?" The next day, one of the other designers, Paolo from Barcelona, was scrolling through Instagram during our lunch break. "Your fiancé is Robert Wellington, yes?" he asked casually. "I think my friend knows him. He just posted a photo at some gallery opening in New York." He turned his phone toward me. There was Robert looking handsome in a suit I'd helped him choose his arm around my sister's waist. Abigail was wearing a dress I'd never seen, her body angled toward Robert in a way that seemed too familiar. They were laughing, looking into each other's eyes in a way that made my heart stop for a moment. "That's actually my sister with him," I said, my voice hollow. Paolo looked confused. "Oh, sorry. The caption mentioned his gorgeous date, so I assumed." I grabbed the phone, reading the post from some society photographer. The caption indeed referred to real estate magnate Robert Wellington and his gorgeous date Abigail Carter, lighting up the room. I called Robert immediately, but the call went to voicemail. I sent a text asking about the gallery opening and got a brief reply an hour later. "Just networking. Abby offered to come along since you're away. Good connections for her job search. Focus on your work, babe." The explanation was reasonable, but something felt very wrong. I tried to concentrate on my designs, but my mind kept returning to that image of them together, to the strange tone in my friend's voice, to the growing distance in Robert's calls. That night, I got a cryptic message from another cousin. "You need to come back, Lillian, trust me." When I called her, she answered with, "I shouldn't get involved, but I saw something today that didn't feel right." Robert and Abigail were at Tiffany's looking very close. She was trying on something on her left hand. My hands shook as I hung up. I told myself there must be an explanation. Perhaps they were picking up our wedding bands. But why wouldn't Robert mention it? And why would Abigail be trying them on? The next morning, in a daze of suspicion and hurt, I somehow created the best work of my career. The judges praised my collection, awarding me first place in the competition. As applause surrounded me and cameras flashed, all I could think about was getting home. I changed my flight, not telling anyone I was returning early. The 14-hour journey felt endless, my mind racing through every interaction, every strange comment, every warning sign I'd ignored. By the time the plane landed in New York, I'd convinced myself I was overreacting, that there would be a simple explanation for everything. The taxi dropped me at my apartment building, and I nodded to the doorman, who looked surprised to see me. "Welcome back, Ms. Carter. We weren't expecting you until next week." I forced a smile. I finished early. When I entered my apartment, I immediately sensed something was wrong. Little things were out of place. My favorite throw blanket was folded differently. There were wine glasses I didn't recognize in the dish rack. My closet door was open, and I could see spaces where clothes should have been. Most disturbing of all, many of Robert's things that he kept at my place were missing: his extra laptop, the expensive watch he kept in my jewelry box, the cashmere sweater I'd given him last Christmas. As I stood frozen in the middle of my living room, my phone chimed with a text from Jessica. "I'm so sorry, Lillian. I tried to tell you. They're at your parents' house right now." The Uber ride to my parents' suburban home felt like traveling to my own execution. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my fingertips as I clutched my phone, reading and rereading Jessica's cryptic message. What exactly was I about to walk into? As the car pulled up to the familiar two-story colonial where I'd grown up, I noticed several cars in the driveway, including Robert's black Range Rover and my parents' sedan. The house was lit up, and I could hear music and voices through the open windows, a celebration of some kind. I paid the driver and stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, gathering my courage. Whatever was happening inside, I needed to face it with dignity. I smoothed my travel-wrinkled clothes, took a deep breath, and walked to the front door. It was unlocked, so I stepped inside without knocking. The voices were coming from the living room: laughter, the clink of glasses, the murmur of congratulations. I moved silently through the entryway, my carry-on suitcase still in hand. When I reached the archway to the living room, the scene before me stopped me cold. There were perhaps 15 people gathered: family members, a few close friends, and at the center of it all, my sister Abigail. She was wearing a white dress. Not just any white dress, but my white dress. The custom gown I had designed stitch by stitch for my own wedding, altered to fit her slightly shorter frame. And beside her, with his arm around her waist, was Robert, my fiancé. Except the matching gold band on his left hand told me he wasn't my fiancé anymore. The room fell silent as they noticed me standing there. I watched emotions flicker across their faces. Shock, guilt, and then most hurtfully, a kind of resigned relief, as if they'd been caught, but were glad the deception was over. "Lillian," my mother finally said, her voice falsely bright. "You're back early, what a surprise." "Clearly," I said, my voice surprisingly steady despite the earthquake happening inside me. "What's going on here?" No one spoke. Robert stared at the floor. Abigail clutched his arm tighter. "Is someone going to explain why my sister is wearing my wedding dress? Why my fiancé has a wedding band? Why you're all celebrating in my parents' living room?" My voice rose with each question. My father stepped forward, always the family mediator. "Honey, we thought you'd understand once we explained. If you'd just sit down, understand what exactly—" I was still standing in the archway, unable to make myself fully enter the room. Finally, Abigail spoke, her voice carrying that tone of superiority she'd perfected since childhood. She lifted her chin and said the words that would forever divide my life into before and after. "Robert is my husband now." The room spun. I grabbed the doorframe to steady myself. "What did you just say?" "We got married," she continued, her voice growing more confident. "2 days ago. It was a small ceremony, just family. We were going to call you tomorrow to explain everything." "Explain what?" I could barely form words. "How you stole my fiancé, how you're wearing the dress I designed." Robert finally looked up at me, his face a mask of practiced sympathy that made my stomach turn. "Lillian, I'm so sorry. We never meant to hurt you. It just happened." "It just happened," I repeated incredulously. "In the 2 weeks I was gone, you accidentally married my sister." My mother stepped forward, reaching for my arm. I jerked away from her touch. "Sweetheart, these things are complicated." Abigail and Robert realized they had feelings for each other. They tried to fight it, but— "But what?" "Their love was just too strong to wait until after you broke up with me." I turned to Robert, rage building inside me. "Were you planning this before I left? Was sending me to Milan part of the plan?" Abigail answered instead. "Of course not. But when we spent time together planning your wedding, we connected in a way neither of us expected. Robert realized I understood his business in a way you never could with your artistic focus." I looked around the room at my relatives, at people who had known me my entire life. "And you all just went along with this? You attended their wedding 2 weeks after helping me plan mine." My Aunt Barbara had the decency to look ashamed. Others avoided my eyes. My father cleared his throat. "Abigail needs stability, Lillian. You've always been independent, able to take care of yourself. And frankly, Robert's business interests align better with our families. It makes practical sense." Practical sense. I was shouting now, unable to contain the tsunami of betrayal washing over me. "You're justifying this because it's financially convenient." That's when I noticed the flowers around the room, the exact arrangements I had chosen for my wedding. The caterer's platters on the dining room table were from the company Robert and I had hired. Even the champagne was the special vintage we'd selected together. "You used our wedding plans," I whispered, the full extent of their betrayal becoming clear. "You used everything we designed together." Robert stepped toward me, reaching into his pocket. "Lillian, I know this is hard. I want to make it right." He pulled out a check. "I've set aside some money to help you start fresh. A generous settlement to show there are no hard feelings." I stared at the paper he was trying to hand me, unable to comprehend the audacity, the utter humiliation of being paid off by the man who had promised to spend his life with me. "No hard feelings," I repeated. "You stole my fiancé, my wedding, my dress that I designed and sewed with my own hands, and you think a check will make it right?" Abigail sighed dramatically. "Don't be so emotional, Lil. You'll find someone else, someone more appropriate for your lifestyle. Robert and I simply make more sense together. I've always been the practical choice for a man like him." Something inside me shattered completely. I looked at these people, my family by birth, the man I had planned to make my family by choice, and saw nothing but strangers. Cruel, calculating strangers who had conspired behind my back, who had taken everything I loved while I was pursuing my dreams, and who now had the audacity to act like I was overreacting. I turned without another word and walked out the front door, ignoring their calls to come back, to listen, to be reasonable. There was nothing reasonable about any of this. In the space of 20 minutes, I had lost my fiancé, my sister, my parents, and my trust in everything I thought I knew about love and loyalty. I checked into a hotel downtown, my body on autopilot. As soon as I closed the door to my room, I collapsed on the bed, violent sobs tearing through me. I cried until no more tears would come, until my throat was raw and my eyes were swollen. When my phone rang, I almost didn't answer it, but seeing Jessica's name, I picked up. "I'm coming over," she said without preamble. "Text me your hotel and room number." An hour later, Jessica arrived with ice cream and vodka. She held me while I cried fresh tears, telling her everything. "I tried to tell you," she said, her own eyes wet. "But Abigail threatened me. Said if I warned you, she'd make sure you were completely cut out of everything. I thought if I could just stall until you got home." "It wouldn't have mattered," I said dully. "They still would have done it." "There's something else you should know," Jessica said hesitantly. "I wasn't supposed to tell you, but given everything, Robert's business partner Michael has been trying to reach you." "Michael, why?" "He wouldn't say exactly, just that it's important you talk to him before you make any decisions." As if summoned by our conversation, my phone rang with an unknown number. I answered warily. "Lillian, it's Michael Barnes, Robert's partner. We need to talk. There are things about Robert you need to know, things that might explain what's happening." I sat up straighter, a chill running through me. "I'm listening." "Not over the phone. Can we meet tomorrow morning?" I agreed, curiosity momentarily overriding my grief. What else could possibly matter now that I'd lost everything? Jessica stayed with me that night, sleeping on the other side of the king bed as I stared blankly at the ceiling. In the dark stillness, a single thought kept circling. How had I been so blind? And beneath that, a smaller, harder question. What if there was more I still wasn't seeing? Morning arrived with harsh sunlight and a pounding headache. I showered mechanically and dressed in the same clothes I'd worn yesterday, my suitcase still at my apartment where I couldn't face returning. Jessica loaned me a sweater from her overnight bag, and we walked to a small coffee shop near Battery Park, where Michael had agreed to meet me. He was already there when we arrived, looking uncomfortable in a well-cut suit, his normally confident demeanor replaced by something more hesitant. I'd always liked Michael. He was the technical mind behind Robert's vision, handling the financial and legal aspects of their development projects, while Robert managed the creative and client-facing components. "Lillian." He stood as we approached, his eyes taking in my disheveled appearance with sympathy. "Jessica, thank you for coming." We ordered coffee, and as soon as the barista walked away, Michael leaned forward, his voice low. "I heard about what happened. I'm so sorry. I had no idea they would move this quickly." "They?" I asked. "You mean Robert and Abigail?" Michael nodded, looking around as if worried about being overheard. "There's no easy way to tell you this, but Robert's company is failing. We've been in serious trouble for the last 6 months." I stared at him. "What? That's impossible. Robert just closed on that development in Brooklyn. He's always talking about how well things are going." "It's all smoke and mirrors," Michael said grimly. "The Brooklyn project is hemorrhaging money. 2 of our major investors pulled out after discovering some irregularities in our financial reporting. We're facing potential bankruptcy, and there's an ongoing investigation into some of our practices." My coffee arrived, but I couldn't bring myself to touch it. "Why are you telling me this now?" Michael hesitated. "Because I believe you were a target, Lillian. Robert saw your rising success in the fashion world, your connections, your potential. He thought marrying you would give him access to new investor circles, particularly after you were featured in Vogue. The pieces started falling into place with sickening clarity. And then he found out about my sister's trust fund." Michael looked surprised. "You knew about that?" "I knew Abigail had trust fund money coming. I didn't realize Robert knew." "He found out when he met your parents last Christmas. Your father mentioned it during a private conversation. Apparently, Abigail has immediate access to her trust, while yours is structured differently." I nodded slowly. "Mine is tied to specific career milestones. My grandfather believed in earning your way. Abigail's was set up differently. She gets hers outright at 30, which is just a few months from now." Robert's been privately contacting banks and potential investors using his connection to your family when he realized Abigail had easier access to that money. He switched targets. I finished feeling ill. But why the rush? Why not just break up with me and date her normally? The investigation is closing in. He needed funds immediately to cover some questionable transactions. We're talking potential criminal charges. I've been cooperating with the authorities trying to protect myself, but Robert doesn't know that yet. Jessica, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. So he basically married Abigail for immediate access to her money. Does she know this? Michael shook his head. I doubt it. Robert can be very convincing when he wants something. He probably told her it was true love. I sat back in my chair, a strange calm washing over me. They deserve each other, I said finally. Both of them were only ever interested in what they could get. There's more, Michael continued. Robert has a pattern of this behavior. Before you, there was another woman in Boston. He was engaged to her too until he found out her family wasn't as wealthy as he'd believed. That's why we moved operations to New York. Why didn't you warn me? I asked, anger flaring. I tried in my way. Remember when I advised you against combining finances? When I suggested you keep your business completely separate from his investments, I couldn't say more without risking my own position, and honestly, I didn't have proof of his intentions with you. But when I heard about this sudden marriage, I thought about how Robert had been frustrated when I'd taken Michael's advice about keeping my business finances separate. How he'd tried multiple times to convince me to invest in his projects, to introduce him to certain influential people in the fashion industry, to attend events where wealthy potential investors would be present. Is my sister in danger? Despite everything, I couldn't help but worry about Abigail. Not physically, Michael assured me. But financially, she's tied herself to a sinking ship. When this investigation concludes, Robert will likely face serious consequences. Anyone connected to his finances could be implicated. Including me, I realized. We had joint accounts for the wedding expenses. Michael nodded grimly. You need to protect yourself. Immediately. I can recommend a lawyer. As we finished our coffee, Michael provided the name of a financial crimes attorney and warned me to be careful. Robert doesn't know I'm talking to you. He thinks I'm still on his side. I'd like to keep it that way a little longer, at least until the investigators have what they need. I thanked him for the warning, and Jessica and I watched him leave. We sat in silence for a long moment, processing everything. What are you going to do? Jessica finally asked. I squared my shoulders, my shock giving way to determination. First, I'm going to see this lawyer. Then I'm going to rebuild every single part of my life that they tried to destroy. For the first time since walking into my parents' house the day before, I felt a small flicker of something beyond pain. It wasn't quite hope yet, but it was something close to it, the realization that while they had taken much from me, they hadn't taken everything. I still had my talent, my career, my newly won competition victory. And now I had something else too, knowledge. In trying to break me, they had actually given me the power to break free. The next morning, I woke with a clarity I hadn't felt since before Milan. Overnight grief had transformed into determination. I would not let Robert Abigail or my parents' betrayal define my future. I got dressed in clothes Jessica had retrieved from my apartment, applied my makeup with careful precision, and prepared to reclaim my life piece by piece. My first stop was the office of Patricia Diaz, the financial crimes attorney Michael had recommended. Her midtown office was sleek but welcoming, and she listened without interruption as I explained my situation. Unfortunately, this type of financial manipulation isn't uncommon, she said when I finished. The good news is you discovered this before you were legally tied to Mr. Wellington. The bad news is you may still have exposure through those joint accounts. What can I do? I asked. First, we document everything. Then we contact the Financial Crimes Unit handling the investigation and offer your cooperation. If there's evidence Mr. Wellington was misappropriating funds from your joint accounts, that strengthens your position as a victim rather than an accomplice. I spent the next 3 hours going through all my financial records, with Patricia discovering disturbing patterns. Robert had been withdrawing large sums from our wedding fund for months, always with vague explanations about deposits and vendor prepayments. When we checked with those vendors, many confirmed they had never received the money he claimed to have paid. He was embezzling from our wedding account. I realized feeling sick, using my money to prop up his failing business. It appears so, Patricia agreed. And based on these transfer patterns, he began moving funds to new accounts approximately 1 week after you left for Milan. Accounts that now likely have your sister's name on them as well. So he's already given her access to his finances, I said, understanding the implications. She's legally entangled in his schemes now. Most likely, yes. Did your sister have any financial or legal training? She has an MBA. She would understand basic financial structures. That could complicate her claim of ignorance if this goes to court, Patricia noted. She might be considered a knowledgeable participant rather than an unwitting victim. I left Patricia's office with a plan. She would contact the investigators and arrange a meeting. In the meantime, I needed to secure my own business and assets. Next, I called Maria Santiago, the lead judge from the Milano competition, who had also offered me mentorship. Lillian, I was just about to call you. The fashion houses are buzzing about your collection. We've had 3 inquiries about stocking your designs. I nearly cried with relief. In the chaos of personal betrayal, I'd almost forgotten my professional triumph. That's amazing news, Maria. I'm dealing with some unexpected personal issues at home, but I'm fully committed to moving forward with these opportunities. Personal issues often fuel our greatest creative breakthroughs, she said kindly. Let me know when you're ready to discuss next steps. With my career advancement secured, I turned to the painful task of my living situation. I couldn't return to my apartment knowing Abigail had been living there, sleeping there with Robert. Jessica offered her sofa, but I needed a clean break, a fresh space untainted by betrayal. I spent the afternoon apartment hunting, eventually finding a small studio in Chelsea. It was overpriced and half the size of my previous place, but it was available immediately, and the landlord, touched by a simplified version of my situation, waived the usual lengthy approval process. That evening, Jessica helped me collect essential items from my old apartment when we knew Robert and Abigail would be out at some event. I took only what was undeniably mine: my design materials, personal documents, clothes, and a few sentimental items. Everything else, jewelry Robert had given me, furniture we'd chosen together. Even the expensive coffee maker he'd bought for my birthday, I left behind. I wanted nothing that would remind me of him. Over the next week, I established boundaries with my family. When my mother called crying about family rifts and begging me to be reasonable, I was direct. You chose sides when you attended their wedding, wearing the mother of the bride dress we picked out together. You chose sides when you let Abigail wear my handmade dress. I need space from all of you until you acknowledge what you did. My father's call was similar, full of justifications about what was best for everyone and practical considerations. I hung up mid-sentence. With my personal life in controlled freefall, I threw myself into work, channeling my pain into a new collection that was darker and more powerful than anything I'd created before. The pieces spoke of betrayal, resilience, and transformation themes that resonated with buyers who'd seen my Milan collection. 2 weeks after my return, I received an unexpected call from Robert's mother, Eleanor Wellington. Lillian, I just heard what happened. I've been in Europe visiting my sister. Please tell me it's some kind of horrible misunderstanding. I wish it were Eleanor, but Robert married my sister while I was away. Her sharp intake of breath told me this truly was news to her. That's impossible. He wouldn't, with your sister, after everything you two built together. It's true. They had a small ceremony at my parents' house. They used our wedding venue, our plans, even my dress. Eleanor was silent for a long moment. This isn't the son I raised, she finally said, her voice tight with anger. First these business problems I've been hearing whispers about, and now this. Lillian, I want you to know that regardless of what Robert has done, Thomas and I consider this behavior reprehensible. You will always be welcome in our home. Her support brought fresh tears to my eyes. I'd always loved Robert's parents, their warmth and integrity, so at odds with what their son had become. As October turned to November, Jessica began monitoring Abigail's social media, reporting that she and Robert were flaunting their new life together: extravagant dinners, weekend trips to the Hamptons, shopping sprees at high-end stores. They're burning through money like water, Jessica observed, showing me photos of Abigail with a new designer handbag. Almost like they're trying to spend it before it can be taken away. Meanwhile, my meeting with the financial crimes investigators had gone well. They were particularly interested in the evidence I provided about specific transactions from our joint accounts that coincided with Robert's business activities. This helps establish a pattern, the lead investigator told me. We're building a comprehensive case. When we move, it will be definitive. I was settling into my new routine, focusing on my career, attending therapy twice weekly, rebuilding my sense of self when I received an embossed invitation in the mail. Robert and Abigail Wellington cordially invited me to a housewarming party at their new penthouse apartment. The audacity, Jessica breathed when I showed her. Why would they invite you? To gloat, I said simply, or to try to normalize what they did. Either way, I'm not going. But that evening, I received a text from Michael. They've invited everyone from our business circle to this party. It's Robert's attempt to project success and stability while the investigation closes in. If you really want to see justice served, come to the party. Trust me on this. I stared at the message for a long time, weighing my options. The thought of seeing them together, watching them play happy couple in a luxurious penthouse while I was still picking up the pieces of my life, made me physically ill. But Michael's cryptic message suggested something important might happen. After much consideration, I texted back, "I'll be there, but I'm bringing someone." "Good," Michael replied. "Wear something stunning." The evening of the housewarming party arrived crisp and clear. I stood in my small studio apartment, staring at my reflection in the full-length mirror. I'd chosen a dress from my Milan collection, a sleek black design with unexpected structural elements that made it both powerful and undeniably unique. My hair was styled in a sophisticated updo, my makeup flawless but subtle. I looked successful, confident, unbroken. Jessica watched me from the sofa, concern in her eyes. "Are you sure about this, seeing them together in their new place?" "I'm sure," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. "I need to face them on my terms, not hide away like I've done something wrong." The doorbell rang and Jessica answered it. Michael stood in the hallway looking elegant in a dark suit. "You look incredible," he said when he saw me. "Ready to make an entrance." "As I'll ever be," I replied, gathering my coat and clutch. On the way to the Upper East Side address, Michael briefed me on what to expect. Roberts invited potential investors trying to secure last-minute funding before everything falls apart. He doesn't know how far along the investigation is or that I've been cooperating. Just follow my lead and try to act normal. Define normal when attending a party thrown by your ex-fiancé and sister, who got married behind your back, I said dryly. Michael laughed despite the tension. "Fair point. Just try not to throw champagne in anyone's face until I give the signal." When our Uber pulled up to the luxury building, I took a deep breath, centering myself. This wasn't about revenge or scene-making. It was about reclaiming my dignity, and if Michael was to be believed, seeing justice finally served. The penthouse was exactly what I would have expected Robert and Abigail to choose: ostentatious, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park minimalist furnishings that probably cost more than my yearly rent, and strategic lighting designed to impress. About 30 people milled around drinking champagne and admiring the view. We handed our coats to a uniformed attendant and stepped into the main room. The conversations nearest us faltered as people recognized me, then resumed with heightened intensity. I held my head high, accepting a champagne flute from a passing server. It took less than 2 minutes for Robert to spot us. He was across the room, engaged in animated conversation with a silver-haired man I recognized as a potential investor. His smile froze when our eyes met, and he excused himself to approach us. "Lillian," he said, his voice carefully controlled. "I wasn't sure you'd come." "I'm full of surprises," I replied coolly. "Though not as surprising as coming home to find my fiancé married to my sister." Robert's facade cracked slightly before he recovered. "I see you brought Michael as your date. How professional of you both." Michael smiled thinly. "Just supporting a friend through an awkward social situation. Beautiful place you have here. Must have cost a fortune." "We wanted a fresh start," Robert said, his eyes darting between us. "Abigail has excellent taste." In homes or fiancés? I couldn't resist asking. Before he could respond, Abigail appeared at his side, a possessive hand on his arm. She wore an expensive designer dress that somehow still looked wrong on her, like she was playing dress-up in clothes she didn't understand. "Lillian," she said, her voice falsely bright. "You came. And with Michael. How nice." "Abigail," I acknowledged. "Congratulations on your new home and your new husband. You've been busy." She had the audacity to laugh. "Well, when you know what you want, why wait? Robert and I are so in sync about everything. It's like we were always meant to be together." "How fascinating," I said, sipping my champagne. "And so convenient that all the wedding arrangements were already made. All you had to do was step into my dress." Robert shifted uncomfortably. "Perhaps we should discuss this privately." "Why?" I asked innocently. "I thought this was a celebration. Aren't you proud of your whirlwind romance? Your beautiful new home, your exciting future together?" Michael touched my elbow lightly, a warning not to push too far. Abigail's smile tightened. "We are very proud. In fact, Robert's just closed a huge new development deal." "Haven't you, darling? Tell them about it." Robert launched into an elaborate description of a new luxury development in Tribeca, complete with projected profits that made Michael raise an eyebrow almost imperceptibly. "Sounds ambitious," Michael commented when Robert finished, "especially given the current market conditions." "It's all about vision," Robert replied dismissively, "and having the right partner both in business and in life." He pulled Abigail closer, but I noticed the strain around his eyes. I excused myself to use the restroom, needing a moment away from their performance. In the hallway, I passed Robert's home office, the door slightly ajar. Inside, I glimpsed a wall of framed project renderings. Projects I knew were either failing or complete fabrications. On his desk was a photo of him and Abigail. On what appeared to be their wedding day, she in my dress, he in the suit we had chosen together. The sight should have hurt, but instead I felt a strange detachment, as if I were observing characters in a play, rather than people who had once been central to my life. Their entire existence seemed built on illusion, on appearances rather than substance. And illusions I knew from experience eventually shattered. When I returned to the main room, I noticed a disturbance near the elevator. Two men in suits were speaking with the doorman, showing him some kind of identification. Michael caught my eye from across the room and gave an almost imperceptible nod. "What's happening?" I asked when I reached his side. "Justice," he replied quietly. The men in suits entered the penthouse, followed by several uniformed police officers. The party fell silent as they approached Robert, who had gone pale. "Robert Wellington," one of the men said loud enough for everyone to hear. "I'm Special Agent Davis with the FBI Financial Crimes Unit. We have a warrant for your arrest on charges of wire fraud, securities fraud, and money laundering." The room erupted in shocked whispers as Robert was read his rights. Abigail stood frozen, her champagne glass slipping from her fingers and shattering on the marble floor. "What is this?" she demanded, her voice shrill. "There must be some mistake." "No mistake, Mrs. Wellington," Agent Davis replied. "We've been investigating your husband's business practices for months. We have substantial evidence of fraudulent activities, including misappropriation of investor funds and falsification of financial records." As Robert was handcuffed, another agent approached Abigail. "We'll need to speak with you as well, Mrs. Wellington. All accounts associated with your husband have been frozen pending investigation, including joint accounts opened within the past month." The color drained from Abigail's face. "Frozen? But that's our money, my trust fund." "Any funds commingled with potentially fraudulent assets are subject to review," the agent explained. "If you've transferred personal assets into joint accounts, those will be included in the freeze until they can be properly traced and verified." I watched as the realization dawned on my sister. Her new husband was being arrested for financial crimes. Their accounts were frozen and she was potentially implicated in his schemes. She turned to Robert with dawning horror. "Did you know about this?" she demanded. "Did you marry me for my money?" Robert, already being led toward the elevator, couldn't answer. The party guests began quickly gathering their things, eager to distance themselves from the unfolding scandal. As the chaos swirled around us, my eyes met Abigail's across the room. In that moment, I saw the truth. She had been played, just as I nearly had been, but with one crucial difference. She had actively participated in the betrayal that led her here. "You knew, didn't you?" she accused, stalking toward me. "You knew this was going to happen." "I knew Robert was under investigation," I acknowledged calmly. "I found out the day after I discovered you'd married him. I've been cooperating with the authorities ever since." "You did this to punish me," she spat. "No, Abigail. Robert did this to himself. You were just collateral damage in his schemes. Though I can't say I'm particularly sympathetic given how you came to be his wife." My parents pushed through the dispersing crowd, their faces ashen. They had apparently been invited to this showcase of their new son-in-law's success, only to witness his downfall instead. "What's happening?" my father demanded. "Why are they arresting Robert?" "Because he's a fraud," I said simply. His business was failing. He was using Abigail's trust fund to try to stay afloat. The man you thought was such a perfect match for your practical daughter turns out to be a criminal. My mother turned to Abigail. "Is this true? Did you know about this?" "Of course not," Abigail cried. "How could I possibly know? We've only been married a few weeks." "A few weeks during which you gave him access to your trust fund," I pointed out, "after stealing my fiancé, my wedding, and my dress." As the remaining officers escorted Abigail away for questioning, and my parents followed in distress, I stood in the center of the now empty penthouse, feeling strangely calm. Michael approached, placing a gentle hand on my shoulder. "You okay?" I nodded slowly. "I didn't come for revenge. I came for closure. And I think I got it." We left the building in silence, the cool night air a relief after the stifling atmosphere of the penthouse. As we walked toward the street to hail a cab, I took one last look up at the gleaming building. "They really thought they could build happiness on lies and betrayal," I said softly. Michael nodded. "Some people mistake possessions for success, appearance for substance. Robert always wanted shortcuts. And Abigail thought she was getting everything she ever wanted. Instead, she got exactly what she deserved," Michael observed. As we climbed into a taxi, I felt something I hadn't experienced since before Milan, a sense of peace. The people who had betrayed me were facing consequences, not from any action I had taken for revenge, but from the natural outcome of their own choices. There was a certain poetry to that kind of justice, a balance restored not through vengeance, but through truth. 1 year later, I stood in my new design studio in Manhattan's Garment District, surveying the space with quiet pride. Sunlight streamed through the large windows, illuminating the fabric samples, sketches, and mood boards that covered nearly every surface. 3 seamstresses worked at stations along one wall, carefully constructing pieces for my upcoming collection. In the corner, my assistant fielded calls and organized shipments to the boutiques that now carried my designs. The Milano competition had been just the beginning. The collection I'd created in the aftermath of betrayal, dark, powerful pieces about transformation and resilience, had resonated deeply with buyers and fashion editors. What began as personal catharsis became my signature aesthetic, earning me recognition not just as a talented designer, but as a voice, speaking to women's experiences of adversity and recovery. I ran my fingers along a bolt of midnight blue silk, marveling at how much had changed in 12 months. The journey hadn't been easy or linear. There were days when grief ambushed me, when anger threatened to consume me, when I questioned everything about myself and my judgment. But I had survived, and more than that, I had rebuilt. Therapy twice weekly had been essential to my healing process. My therapist, Dr. Morales, helped me understand that while the betrayal was never my fault, I could use the experience to strengthen my boundaries and clarify my values. She guided me through exercises to process the anger, the loss, and eventually to find forgiveness, not for them, but for myself, for all the ways I had ignored red flags and compromised my needs. "Processing pain isn't linear," she reminded me often. "Some days you'll feel healed, and other days it will feel fresh again. Both experiences are valid." Robert's trial had concluded 3 months ago, with a guilty verdict on multiple counts of fraud. He was serving a 5-year sentence in a minimum security federal prison. The investigation had revealed extensive financial misconduct going back years before I'd even met him, confirming Michael's assertion that Robert had a pattern of using relationships for financial gain. Abigail had avoided criminal charges by cooperating with prosecutors, but the legal fees and asset freezes had depleted much of her trust fund. Last I heard through family channels, she was living in a small apartment in Boston, working an entry-level corporate job similar to the one she'd had before meeting Robert. The divorce had been finalized while he awaited trial. My relationship with my parents remained complicated. After Robert's arrest, they had attempted to apologize, claiming they'd been deceived by him just as Abigail had been. But their justifications never acknowledged their betrayal of me, their willingness to sacrifice one daughter's happiness for another's, their participation in the wedding, their tacit approval of the theft of my designs and plans. We had begun a careful reconciliation process with clear boundaries, coffee meetings in neutral locations, limited conversations about safe topics. Slowly, painfully, we were rebuilding some semblance of trust. My mother had visited the studio once, looking at my successful business with new eyes. "I never really understood what you were building," she'd admitted. "I'm sorry for that." It wasn't a complete acknowledgement of the harm they'd done, but it was a start. Healing family wounds would take time, perhaps years, but I was no longer in a rush. I had learned the value of protecting my peace. The bell above the studio door chimed, interrupting my thoughts. I turned to see Jessica entering with coffee cups and a small bakery box. "Celebratory treats," she announced. "The Vogue feature is officially on newsstands today. You're now fashion's official Phoenix Rising, according to Anna Wintour herself." I laughed, accepting both the coffee and the new nickname. Jessica had been my rock throughout everything, and our friendship had only deepened through the ordeal. "You know what today is, right?" she asked, perching on my design table. I nodded. 1 year since Milan. 1 year since everything fell apart. "And look at everything you've built from those ashes," she said, gesturing around the thriving studio. "That's worth celebrating." As we enjoyed our coffee, my phone buzzed with a message from Daniel, the architectural photographer I'd been dating for the past 4 months. We'd met when he came to photograph my studio for a design magazine, and unlike my whirlwind romance with Robert, our relationship was developing slowly, thoughtfully. He knew my story and respected my need for time and space to heal. "Still on for dinner tonight," his message read. "I found a new Thai place I think you'll love." I smiled as I replied affirmatively. Dating again had been scary at first, but Daniel's patience and transparency had slowly rebuilt my faith and connection. He was straightforward about his finances, modest, but stable, genuinely interested in my work, without trying to capitalize on it, and refreshingly honest about his own past relationship mistakes. Where Robert had been all flash and charm, Daniel was substance and sincerity. That evening after dinner, we walked along the High Line, the elevated park offering views of the city lights. Daniel took photos occasionally. His camera was as much a part of him as my sketchbook was of me, but mostly we just talked, sharing thoughts about projects, dreams, fears. "You seem reflective tonight," he observed. "Anniversary of some kind." I nodded, appreciating his perception. 1 year since the great betrayal, 1 year of rebuilding. He nodded, not offering platitudes or judgments, just acknowledgement. After a moment, he said, "You know what amazes me about you? You never let it make you bitter, cautious, yes, thoughtful about who you trust absolutely, but you didn't let them take your capacity for joy or connection." His observation brought unexpected tears to my eyes. It was true, through conscious effort and a lot of inner work, I had refused to let betrayal harden my heart permanently. I had learned to trust myself first, to value my intuition, to establish clear boundaries, but I hadn't closed myself off from new experiences or relationships. "The most important thing I learned," I said after a moment, "is that someone else's betrayal says everything about their character and nothing about my worth." For a while, I wondered what was wrong with me that the people closest to me could hurt me so deeply. But eventually I realized that was the wrong question. What was the right question? Daniel asked, genuinely interested. What kind of life do I want to build now? What values do I want to live by? How can I use this experience to become stronger, more authentic, more compassionate? Those were the questions that actually led to healing. We stopped walking, looking out at the Hudson River and the lights reflecting on the water. I think the hardest lesson, I continued, was accepting that I couldn't control or predict other people's choices. All I can control is how I respond, who I choose to be afterward, and who I allow into my life going forward. Daniel nodded thoughtfully. That's wisdom earned the hard way. The only way it ever really sticks, I replied with a small smile. Later that night, back in my apartment, a beautiful one-bedroom I'd moved into 6 months ago, I sat on my balcony with a cup of tea, reflecting on the year's journey, from devastation to rebuilding, from betrayal to new beginnings, from lost dreams to discovering ones I'd never imagined. I thought about the frightened, shocked woman who had stood in her parents' living room a year ago, watching her world collapse. I wished I could tell her that the collapse, painful as it was, would clear space for something more authentic to be built. That the people who betrayed her would face consequences not through revenge, but through the natural outcome of their own actions. That she would not only survive, but thrive in ways she couldn't yet imagine. Most importantly, I wished I could tell her that her value had never depended on Robert's love or her family's loyalty, that she was enough just as she was, and that the painful stripping away of illusions would eventually reveal a strength and clarity she didn't know she possessed. I couldn't send that message back in time, but I could honor that journey by continuing to move forward with integrity, with creative purpose, and with an open but wiser heart. That seemed like the most fitting way to mark this anniversary, not with bitterness over what was lost, but with gratitude for the unexpected gifts that emerged from the wreckage. The path forward wasn't perfect or certain, but it was authentically mine. And after everything, that felt like the greatest victory of all. What about you? Have you ever experienced a betrayal that ultimately led to unexpected growth or freedom? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Also, if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories of resilience and renewal. And remember, sometimes the most painful endings clear the path for the most beautiful beginnings. Thank you for listening to my journey, and I wish you strength in whatever challenges you might be facing in your own life.